None of those define games as a service. Microtransactions. And you may not believe this, but no, those are not what define games as a service. Here are a few games as a service that had no microtransactions whatsoever. However, I will say the overwhelming majority of games as a service do have microtransactions, and this is the number one reason companies really like this practice. However, since exceptions do exist, this is not actually what defines it. Subscription fees. Very few games still have these, so no. However, we have that trick again. Most games as a service do not have a subscription fee, but all games with a subscription fee are games as a service. Get it? Frequent updates. Well, a lot of good games as a service have these, but again, it's by no means what defines them. Plenty of games as a service go by years with no updates at all. So, nope, that's not it either. And massive multiplayer games. Nope, still not it. On one hand, you have some games as a service that are intended for a small number of players. On the other hand, you've had some gigantic games that are not this practice. The multiplayer mod for Just Cause 2 has had over 1,800 simultaneous players in the game, yet it is not considered games as a service. MMO games are usually games as a service, but not what defines it. Okay, so wow. The only definition that survived is games as a service are online only, and even that one has a caveat. See, some games are just meant to be played online. If you play the game Star Siege Tribes, the only way to really play it is to connect to other people. In essence, it's an online-only game. Yet it is not games as a service. You know why? Because you're still the one in control. Games as a service means the company is providing you the service of allowing you to play your game. And yes, I am being facetious. You didn't used to need permission for that. Now, people will debate what games as a service should mean, but this is the real world hard definition. Games as a service means the business practice of players not having control of whether they can play a game due to a company withholding that function. That is all it is in its purest, most distilled form. Oh, sure, they usually have other stuff on this list, but none of those other traits could survive the definition test. In fact, I'd say this definition isn't even the intent of games as a service, but it is what defines it. If it doesn't have this, it is not games as a service. Okay, fraud time. So now we have a concrete definition of games as a service. But why is it fraud? Well, the simplest answer is it's being sold as something it's not. I'll break it down. But first, we have to understand the difference between a good and a service. Products are defined as services or goods. A good is something you buy and own. A service is an action performed for you. So if you buy a hammer, it's a good. It's a thing. It's yours. But if you get a haircut, that's a service. They didn't just hand you your haircut in a box. They used scissors to deliver the desired result. Or so I'm told. And again, I have to rail on Wikipedia here. Since they define goods as something tangible, then later say they're not always tangible. Good job contradicting yourself in the first sentence, guys. Whatever, that second part is correct. So things like digital movies you buy are intangible goods. You can't touch a movie, but it's still sold like a physical good. Well, guess what? Most games are goods too. Even games as a service. So yes, I just said games as a service are not services. I'll get to that. But I have to concede on one point. If it's a game that has a subscription fee that you pay each month, like World of Warcraft, under most laws, those are services, and I don't think I can make the case those are fraud. Those win this round. But you know what? We can work with that. Since that's what, 5 games now? Yeah, maybe 10. But let's try to establish legally that games as a service are not services. Now, of course, the law is different in every country, but we'll cover some major ones. Now, I can't take credit for most of this part. I found bits and crumbs of this on my own, But then I stumbled into a motherload of information on why games are goods and you own them. A highly researched user, Delicieux, created the best layman's explanation on this topic I've seen in the Linus Tech Tips forum. Oh, hi Linus. Now I admit, this is a colorful title, but putting that aside, he has some good logic. So let's look at the abridged version. A license is a right to use a property or intellectual property that belongs to somebody else. When you read, this software is licensed, not sold, in a software end user license agreement, this software refers to the software intellectual property and not the copy of that intellectual property that you've purchased via a software license. The software intellectual property is licensed, not sold. The license is sold, not licensed or leased. A little confusing there, but let's keep going. All the mass-produced items you've bought follow the same rules. You are purchasing a one-off copy of the intellectual property of those things, and there is a transfer of ownership over those instances, and you become the sole owner of that instance of intellectual property. You own it and have full property rights over it. Okay, just so everybody's with me, he's saying if you buy a copy of Half-Life, you don't own the rights to the Half-Life franchise. You can't sell additional copies of it, but you do own your copy of Half-Life. A lot of goods are like this. If you buy a car, you don't own the manufacturing and design rights to that car model, but you do own your car. It's a basic concept. I said before I'm going up against a narrative. Well, one myth you hear sometimes is you don't own any of your software. What he's doing here is explaining why that's almost always false. Turns out you have ownership rights after all. Who knew? Next, he says there are two types of software licenses, perpetual and subscription licenses. Perpetual ones last forever. So that copy of Mega Man that your brother has in the attic, that's a perpetual license. And this is why World of Warcraft gets a free pass for now. They want $15 a month. That's as clear as day a subscription license. If you're not paying a subscription fee for your game, then it's being bought under a perpetual license. That's a really key point. A whole lot of things are going to come back to this. A perpetual license is a product, and whenever it's sold, it undergoes transfer of ownership upon the point of sale. Ownership is what establishes one's decision-making authority over the thing. To sell something is to relinquish it as one's property and to relinquish all of one's decision-making authority over that thing to the person who bought it. Then the seller no longer has any rightful say over anything regarding that instance of software represented by its perpetual license. So there it is. If you only have to pay once and it's not a subscription fee for your game, then by definition, it's being sold under a perpetual license. Under most countries' laws, that means it's a good and not a service. This is why I wonder if games as a service is a deliberate propaganda term. It means the exact opposite of what it says. But I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, this is just some guy on the internet saying words. That doesn't prove anything. Fair point. But you know what helps a legal argument? If you back up what you're saying with legal documents that say the same thing. And that's exactly what he does, for multiple countries. The European Union's highest court, the Court of Justice, has ruled that software sold via a perpetual license represents a good rather than a service, and the purchaser becomes the exclusive owner of that instance, just like a physical good. Then he links to the court documents for Ubisoft versus Oracle and a more professional explanation of what that means. Next up, Canada. He gives an outdated link, but I found this court case which apparently rules software as a service is a good, as explained in this article. They even refer to software as a service. I love it when it's black and white like that. And later he revises things saying Canada follows the World Intellectual Property Organization's International Classification of Goods and Services Guidelines. Yeah, you know we're having fun now with a name like that. Anyway, they say they're goods too. Next, Australia. You may have heard of this one. In the case of the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission versus Valve Corporation, Australia rules that sure enough, games are goods. You have to love this quote in the conclusion. Each of Valve's challenges to the applicability of the Australian consumer law fails. Yada yada, Valve supplied goods, which are defined as including computer software. And then we get to the United States.